you need to take Auth seriously. A lot of AI is in production at enterprises. Consumers are using it more. With agents, you want to do a lot of things, right? And they are not deterministic, which means they can fail in very interesting ways. It's like it needs to be secure, and it needs to be scalable, and you need compliance, and you need auditability, and you need the regions. You need to think about roles and access, and like, is that access coarse grain or fine grain? How many factors do you have? And like, how do you make sure that those factors manage security and UX wise?
With something like a just-in-time like credential out there that's only scoped to a specific task?
People are giving them access. Do you really need to, or is it just like you're tinkering at the edge? Even Google doesn't have all of their kind of like ducks in a row, or like not all of their APIs are there. Mm-hmm. Imagine like other like more terrestrial companies where like they need to do a bunch of things.
Welcome to today's episode of the Insecure Agents podcast. I'm your host, Ali Howe, and today we're here at Okta HQ in San Francisco with Damian Schenkelman, who is the VP of Research and Development here at Auth0, which was acquired by Okta. I'm super excited to chat with you today about why Auth is hard. Damian, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Ali. So my name is Damian. I've been working at Auth0 almost since the beginning. One of the first engineers, got to build a lot of the product, got to build a lot of the engineering early our scaling architecture. And then for the past, I think 5 years now, I've been working on kind of like new product research. Our team, Auth0 Lab, worked on FGA.dev, OpenFGA. We worked on Auth0.ai, so a bunch of kind of like big, important Auth0 products and features came from kind of like our incubation.
Yeah, amazing. Now, you've been involved in the Auth world for a long time and super excited to hear all of your learnings today. And like, I guess at a high level, what's different about Auth now that agents are here on the scene? What makes those challenges harder?
I think there are two parts there. Like on the one hand, like we always had like daemons and like back processes, back office processes that like people were running, they didn't have a UI and they just did things. So like you might have given them an API key in most cases, maybe like a client credential exchange token, something like that. And because they were deterministic, because you kind of like scope them in like in a small way, like that was okay, or maybe not okay, probably, but like not a priority to do something else. But now with agents, you want to do a lot of things, right? And they are not deterministic, which means they can fail in very interesting ways. Like I remember there was this incident where like someone deployed a repository, the wrong repository to their Vercel account. And that's because like the linking between the repo ID that you share with Vercel and the kind of like the ownership of the repo was like not kind of like cryptographically bound, authenticated and stuff. So like it can hallucinate parameters to tool calls, right? Things like that. And that means that like getting Auth right is very important, because if the credential can't do something, you can't, even if the agent kind of like goes haywire.
Yeah, that makes sense for sure. I've been following your tweets on Twitter, and one of them is this like thread that you have called like Auth is hard. And I think you started it in March. And since then, there's been many additions to that list of like recent incidents and exhibitions of why Auth is hard. I think like a couple on that list stood out to me as maybe I think there was a CDN like incident where someone's content delivery network got like unauthorized access, or someone was able to see things on that network that maybe they just weren't able to. And like another one was like a high profile like tech company had a third party AI provider had their OAuth token stolen and then used that to get unauthorized access into their company's, one of their employees' accounts, which is like super scary for sure. Why do you think we're seeing more of these incidents all of a sudden?
It's hard to say why, because like sometimes with the postmortems, I don't think you necessarily kind of like get a lot of like the real deal. I think like the first thing is to get into like why is Auth hard. So I think what we're seeing is that like we're coming from kind of like in general, and I don't know if it's related to these incidents, because like again it's hard to say like, okay, what was AI, what wasn't AI. But in general, like we're coming from the pirate age of AI, where like everyone was trying to kind of like get things done and ship, to like, okay, now like a lot of AI is in production at enterprises. Consumers are using it more. So you need to take Auth seriously, right? And like for many people, Auth was just that login box. Hey, like username, password, now you have passkeys, like maybe SMS, email, whatever. But there's so much going behind the scenes, right? Like that you don't see, right? It's like it needs to be secure, and it needs to be scalable, and you need compliance, and you need auditability, and you need the regions, and like okay, and then you need to think about roles and access, and like is that access coarse grain or fine grain? How do you like how many factors do you have, and like how do you make sure that those factors manage security and UX well? So like, do you like, for example, we've been having deployed ML models for a while around anomaly detection, because you don't want to prompt for MFA every time, right? And you want it to be, okay, hey, this is weird. Like you just did impossible travel. This is really you, like a bunch of those things. And that's kind of like how I feel about like Auth, where like, we've been doing it forever. And I think, and this is like not very humble, that we've done such a good job at hiding the complexities of it and like what people see, that like they forget, hey, all of these things are going on behind the scenes. And that's tough, right? Like you want to take kind of like security seriously. So like I think we're starting to get into that period where like because of these security incidents, people are thinking, hey, like how do I do kind of like governance on in this case, like more on the workforce side, like who can use these applications, right? For example, here at Okta, you can't just like go and sign in with Google to anything. You can't do it. Now, there's a trade-off there, right? Like it's harder for me as like an employee to go experiment with stuff. So like you have to go through permissions and layers. But like there's a reason why like at some scale and at some kind of like level of responsibility, those things are important and you need to take them seriously.
Yes, for sure. Yeah, because it's very easy to, I don't know, go sign in with Google and then see a, OAuth flow where it's like, here's all the scopes that like all the things we want access to. And it's like, it's really easy to end up in a position where like some vendor now has like all this broad access.
Yeah. And there's like, so there's signing with Google, which is, okay, I signed in and maybe I gave you my email address or something. That's one. But then you get into like typical consent, right? Like, Google Drive access or Gmail access and stuff. And this is part of that CLI MCP discussion, right? Where like, there's nothing wrong with a CLI. And like, if the agents can use CLIs better than like, let's say an MCP server with tool calling, that's great. But like the key thing is like, what's the authorization model, right? A CLI is a client. So if you're giving the CLI an API key, and that API key is not just scoped to one user and has permissions not just to like beyond the user, but also to the entire account, right? So let's say it's, I don't know, Google Workspace. Okay, it can access everything in Google Workspace. It's just so that it's convenient. That's when things kind of like can go haywire, right? Because the agent has access to a CLI. Now, if you tell me, hey, this CLI gets dynamic permissions, fine-grained to the specific user, fine-grained for that like use case that they're working with, I don't care if it's a CLI or an MCP. Now, you're getting into, hey, a lot of the MCP primitives. And like, again, we were very early to kind of like working with the MCP team because we understood what they were trying to do. We understood, hey, this is what's going to be needed because we've been working on like authorization, fine-grained authorization for years. And it's not the same like that people are used to. But like, again, there's kind of like consent fatigue, right? Like in general, users don't care. Developers maybe care a bit more, but like you don't want to kind of like consent every time to like lots of scopes and stuff. And that's when things get out of hand, right? Phishing is another example where like fatigue contributes a lot to it.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, no, I think we saw a interesting example like on Twitter of phishing. Last night, where like Swix posted something about you got like a DM from someone like a person named Bloomberg. And like you click on the like, let's schedule a meeting link. And then it ends up like with this OAuth consent screen where it's like, here's like, I want all his permissions. And like the developer isn't like verified or anything. So it's like there's some red flags on it. But I just wonder, would an agent like have caught that?
Yeah.
And how would you prevent an agent from?
Yeah, that's interesting because like, so what I do, like when I've gotten some of these from like TechCrunch, right? Like TechCrunch, right? So first, I'm very like, no, I wouldn't say paranoid, but like, I am very careful. Like when I open stuff, I'm like, okay, like my assumption is that like if I don't know the person, it's probably malicious, and if I know the person and the ask is weird, like, but like there are things that you can do. So for example, you can take a screenshot from the chat and just go to an AI. Like maybe you can like have skill locally or something, or like something in like your ChatGPT account, and you're like, hey, does this look legit? And like if you're asking, does this look legit? It will kind of like try to figure out if it's not. So it will look out for red flags. Another thing you can do, like when you get emails, like you go in and you take like the headers and like the email internals, like the guts of it, and you just send those over. Hey, are these kind of like the right signatures? Like you don't want to do all of that, but like you can send it to like an agent and they will check. Now, I've candidly, because again, I am very conservative in this regard, I've never told the agent the opposite. Like go to my XDMs
Totally.
and say, hey, yes, set up a meeting with, like, I don't know what would happen because like it's not like they're getting like prompt injected. It's like the agent's getting fished.
Yeah.
Because it's, and maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. But like, yeah, I would be careful again, look at the domains. Like, and also a lot of these things appeal to either, I think, urgency or ego, right?
Yes.
It's one of those two. So don't rush into situations. Always kind of like have a second back channel to validate things and make sure that it's a second channel, not kind of like a repeat of the first one. Like, so like, for example, like people reach out to me like on X or on LinkedIn, and like if it's for something important, I try to find someone in common and say, okay, like do I know this person? Do they vouch for this person? Now, like if you go, you get something on LinkedIn and then you just find the person on X and you ping them, it's like it could be the same person, right? So
yeah,
that's one. And the other one is like use AI to check for these inconsistencies, right? Like it's like the one password. Yeah. For like this, like AI, right? Like one password is supposed to help you because like if you get phished, it won't fill in the password because it has a hard-coded domain if you've done it right. Now, if you go copy-paste, that's another thing.
Right.
But like you need kind of like similar practices, so to speak.
Yeah, no, that's tough for sure. Because when I think about agents, like getting into these sorts of scenarios, where like I feel like you're right. Like nobody today in their right mind probably is like letting them access to their X account and to like maybe like web tools to go like actually book a meeting or monitor their X account in that way. But if they were, like, would something like a just-in-time credential help there that's only scoped to a specific task?
So I think people are giving them access. Like if you look at like OpenClaw usage now, Hermes and stuff, like people are doing it. So I think there are two parts here. Like the first one is like, do you really need to, or is it just like you're tinkering at the edge? And if you're tinkering at the edge, you could do this with like fake accounts, or you could scope it like, hey, like, I don't know, you give them a separate email address, you give them a separate WhatsApp number. And WhatsApp is very popular where I'm from in Argentina. Now, if that wasn't the case, then like very granular access and scope to a specific task would be ideal. Like you can still, like bad things can happen, but like let's go through it, right? Let's say, let's use email, which is kind of like simple to understand. We know kind of like Gmail. In Gmail, there's no way to say, hey, you get access to one email. You can read email. Again, there's a few. In Google Drive, you can actually give access to one document. Like there's a way to kind of like consent to that, although it's maybe a bit fatiguing to kind of like consent for one document at a time. With email, you can't. So ideally, you'd want to say, hey, you get access to one email. You can send maybe one email to this person. So like those are kind of like very fine-grained policies. Yeah. And I think regardless of how you get to that policy, it would be nice to give the agent the credential to say, hey, read emails either from this person or from this tag or these specific emails. Like you can only read those, not other things. Mm-hmm. And then for that task, maybe send an email and they can reply to that person or somewhere else. Like that would be very scoped. Things can still go wrong. Like you can still, like that person could have been sending you a link and the link the agent navigates to, or like you get prompt injected. Like it can happen. Yeah. But yeah, I think that would be ideal. The problem is, as I'm saying, like even Google doesn't have all of their kind of like ducks in a row, or like not all of their APIs are there. Mm-hmm. Imagine like other like more terrestrial companies where like they need to do a bunch of things. So I think, yes, this fine-grained access is coming, and ideally this would be done by the product at the kind of like API level. Mm-hmm. Maybe a lot of products do it, and I think, for example, Notion is very good at this. But then you have a lot of other products. And I think this is kind of like my joke is like, this is how enterprise proxies were invented, right? Mm-hmm. Like, to kind of like get in the middle and figure this stuff out while the upstream kind of like gets their ducks in a row.
Mm-hmm. So I'm hearing is like maybe there's like two solutions here where vendors need to go and add this like fine-grained scoped API keys, or just that ability to say, I only want like these specific emails, not just like, broad access to my entire email account. And then once we have that, maybe we need something to help developers choose the right ones so they're not like, consent fatigue and like, or maybe it's a one-time setup thing, so it's not actually a problem. But once we have this like fine-grained auth, like how do like users choose the right ones? How do agents choose the right ones? And like, I've also heard the term like intent-based. authorization where like this is the intent of the task, and based on that, select the scopes that are necessary. Like, do we trust that model, or how does that work?
Yeah, I think that's a lot to unpack.
Yeah. Yeah.
So this is my opinion. There's not going to be, at least, there's no silver bullet, because most of this is like people related, right? And so it's about like what matters to people, right? I remember when we were kind of like in the, let's say, the crypto bull market, and everyone was, oh, you need self-custody and stuff. Like, most people don't care about self-custody. Self-sovereign identity started like that. It's like, oh, you can get custody of all of your like digital credentials. Like, I love digital cryptographic proofs. Like, we can maybe get into that later.
Yeah.
But like, self-custody and cryptographic proofs are not the same thing. And I'm not saying it shouldn't be important for everyone, but not everyone cares about scopes and consent the same way I do.
Yeah.
So you get into like things like intent and fine-grained access. I think we need a way, I don't know what that way is, for users to somehow easily say what they want to allow as little times as possible. Like, the more you do it, the more fatigue they get.
Yes.
And then we need a way to kind of like reduce that access for what the agent's trying to do. So I'm going to give you an example. One thing you could say is like, hey, you go and configure, hey, I allow you to read my emails, right? Maybe that's all a user really wants to allow, because like, they don't want to get into, oh, you can do it by tag or you can do it by person. And maybe they do, and maybe that happens at the enterprise, but like, what about consumers? And then from that read email, you could say, hey, I'm working on this task. Like, you give the agent a prompt, hey, go read, I don't know, emails from today. And so then, like, if again, for some prompts, I think you could kind of like infer intent and then go into, hey, what does that mean for like, what access do I get? So you could say, hey, this is a good example. Read my emails from yesterday, and I create drafts for all of them so that I can review them. That could be a prompt, right? So you're like, okay, I need to read emails, and there's a date range. So because that's a kind of like conceptual subset of read email, you could be like, okay, they allowed read email. Let the agent read email for 1 day. Okay, and you give the agent the credential to read email for 1 day. Once it finishes, you can say, hey, okay, now it needs the draft. Okay, allow it to create drafts, but not delete drafts. And maybe it's like, hey, you say, it should be the same amount of drafts as emails. It can't be more. So like, you get into those things. Okay, so like, you could do that. And there's like a paper from Google, Camel, CAMEL. Like, I think some of them are capital letters, some of them aren't. So like, but like, they try to kind of like get into some of these things. And this is what I'm saying. Like, I think it can be done for some tasks, but not all tasks. But like, the key things will inevitably like be like users, people configuring the systems, people consenting to stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's a hard problem to solve, and it's also like, how do you test it or make sure, like, based on what the user described, this is the right policy?
Yeah.
So yeah, maybe some sort of like, I'm sure a lot of these like use cases are pretty repetitive. So like, hopefully we can have like some default policies or scopes like in place. Or
I think some use cases will be like, again, this date range will probably be common, but then when you get into that, you start, I'm going to use quotes, like losing agency.
Yeah.
So that's the thing. That's not a bad thing, but the question is like, what happens kind of like over time with this kind of like fatigue, right? Because like, you might say, oh, I'm going to do like user research. So I'm going to show people, okay, this is how it works. And maybe they go and they get it. And like, 2-hour research session is not the same as like, I have responsibilities. Maybe some people have kids. Maybe people have other activities. Maybe they're in a rush. And they're like, oh, you just got it. Like, you were, I don't know, at your daughter's recital or at like, your soccer match. And like, are you getting prompts because you didn't configure that policy? You might just go like, allow all.
Totally. Yeah.
So like, I think like, before you didn't have that opportunity because you didn't have these agents doing things for you. So like, there's nothing to consent to. But now, I think that's going to be the biggest trade-off, and that's something that we need to secure, and like, we need to make it easy thinking about like, again, the end user.
Yes, absolutely, for sure. And I also don't know like everything your agent's going to need to connect to ahead of time. And also like, even if you think you have created your agent in a kind of like a silo, like this is a single agent, it's not a multi-agent system. Well, guess what? If you put that your agent in Slack, or somewhere else was going to connect to Linear or Google Workspace or all these other agents. Nothing kind of isn't multi-agent anymore, or this like delegation issue where like you've got like agent A in Slack and it needs to like delegate some tasks to agent B. Like how does the credential path work there? And do you just hand over the entire credentials or only a subset, or what's that model look like today?
Yeah, I think so. One of my very, very identity related jokes on X is like token exchanges are going to happen kind of like all of the time. So that's when like you have a JSON web token to simplify, and you go to kind of like some service like Auth0, like you could go to like the Google 3 and you exchange it for another one. So you'd be like, hey, this is a token that this user granted access to their emails to agent 1. And then agent 1 goes and it's like, hey, I want to talk to agent 2. And I want to delegate like maybe part of those responsibilities. So if it was like say read email and write email, it would be like, oh, this just gets read email. So then like you go exchange it and you're like, okay, this is user 1, I'm agent 1, I want to give agent 2 access to like something like that. And at that point, you're like, okay, you're kind of like creating this chain, right? So like either in a, let's say, centralized authorization server, like again, this Auth0, Google, whatever, or in a decentralized way. There are ways to do this with like crypto and like tokens. Like I think there was like this project. It was like a cookie. I don't remember the name. Like it wasn't like macaroons did something like this, like where you kind of like could constrain things. You want to kind of like keep track of that chain so you can attenuate and you can delegate, and at the same time you keep track of it, because like these are agents and we call them agents, but what at least the way I think about it is like, what hat are they wearing, right? We talk about hats in the industry.
Yes.
So is it acting like as a client? So is it trying to kind of like get data from somewhere on behalf of a user? And that would be like a usual like common application, right? Like you sign in with Google and you gave permissions to Drive. That was a client that connected to your Google API. Okay. In other cases, is it acting kind of like as a user? So is it trying to get stuff like on its own behalf? Does it like, and that could be a thing, right? Where like an agent talks to another because they're chatting and there's no user involved. Or is it acting as an API, as a server, right? It's receiving stuff. And I think that's the key, because like when it's acting as an API, right, it's receiving stuff. That's where you typically implement policy, like your business rules. And you might have different rules, like depending on which agent called you and which user originated the chain, different things might happen. And this is where like there's kind of like a trend in, if you're following identity, there's an ACT claim and everyone's, ACT, and like the ACT chain. And like it's just an array of like who kind of like started the chain, and kind of like you get all of the agents there, and
it's like part of Auth.
I think it's part of Auth, but like the question is like the claim exists, but like how do you use it in different specs, and how does it kind of like get kind of like expanded over time, and like what are the rules for that? So yes.
So it's on the JOT.
It's on the JOT.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So you just decide what to do with it.
Yes. And that's a good thing about JOTs. Because like you kind of like pass them around, and like you don't need to kind of like go fetch from a centralized service. Like you could do this with like an opaque token. So you have the token, but you would have to kind of like call home, hey, who issued this? Okay. And what are you could still get the claims from there. But again, this depends on like what you're trying to do. Ideally, the JOT makes it easy. It's like just stateless and no network call and stuff.
Yeah, that's really helpful to see like, if your agent seeing this like delegation change, who like, A and B were part of this like delegation change before that. And so that can influence your policy, that can influence like the authorization model. I've heard of like new protocols that are coming on the scene, like Auth, for example, and it seems like they're going to be doing like cryptographic signatures. So like not only do you see like A and B in this array now in this claim, but you can also see like exactly like who A and B is because of this cryptographic signature. Yeah. What does that give us that we didn't have before?
So one thing is the chain, which we typically didn't have. Like, and you could do it, but like not everyone was doing it because this wasn't that common. And when it was common, like, and it didn't matter that much. So like, as I say, like the frequency has changed and now it matters more. I think in general, regardless of whether it's a Auth or like any other spec, or even how a Auth ends up working, we've used different ways of identifying things. And one of them has always been like PKI, like you give it a private key, maybe you have certs. That in my mind feels natural, right? Like when I think about like how could I identify an agent doing its thing, I think about a root authority, right? Like you have a cert with a root. you have search under it. Each agent instance gets kind of like a sub part of that tree, and it could be a tree, not just like one level. Then on the other hand, you kind of like trust at different levels of that authority, right? So if I'm going to kind of like give you an example, like you could say, hey, I trust any OpenAI agent, and that's the root. Or I trust any codex, which is part of OpenAI, but it's not just OpenAI because deep research is another one. But then the codex instance is different, right? Okay, and then you just trust at whatever level you want. And that could be helpful for like partnerships. That could be helpful for like rate limiting and policy and stuff. So like there's a bunch of things there. And in my mind, again, we have the primitives, right? Like you don't need to invent anything new, but you need to know kind of like where to use these things, and knowing who the agent is from like a cryptographically verifiable perspective is very valuable.
Yes, for sure. Yeah, in terms of some of the other gaps that exist today, it seems like there's not really a good way to understand if a human authorized an agent to go do something. I mean, think about like abuse, or taking an agent, or just having a human like spin up a bunch of agents to go like influence something on the web. Like, are you working on something like in that space, or can you tell us more about it?
That is one of the experiments that I can talk about. So we're working on this thing called human principal.ai. It's exactly this problem, right? And we think about it different from like delegation, like, and without getting into like technicalities, right? It's like accounts and people are not the same. Like I have lots of Gmail accounts, but I'm one person, right? So when people typically think about delegating, they're like, okay, the agent can do things on my behalf for one of my Gmail accounts. But that doesn't tell Google that it's the same person using Gmail. Now, when you get into kind of like asymmetric situations where like the payoff for one thing is kind of like very different from the cost, that gets tricky. A very clear example for this is free developer plans, right? If you are a company that wants to give like the free plan, and then your product does like Vercel, free compute, resend, free emails, Auth0, free Auth, like you are giving stuff for free with the expectation that at some point they convert. Now, if I could create infinite resend accounts, I could send a lot of emails and it costs them, but it didn't cost me anything, right? So there's like an asymmetry there because there is a real cost for them. So Resend needs to implement like some abuse protection, like who can create accounts, how do you limit them, and so on. Well, what if you could, when an agent is creating an account for you, check that there's a person behind it? You don't know who the person is, but you know it's the same person from before. And that applies, again, DevTools is what we're used to, but like that applies to social media, right? Like, hey, you get in Reddit lots of posts, and you don't like, maybe one person has like 10,000 accounts and they just automate that. So if Reddit wants to rate limit it, and then you get into, is it within their incentive? Do they prefer that or not? That's something else. But if they want to, hey, what if either when you create your account or when you're posting, you attach cryptographic proof that Ali is the person kind of like that owns the agent, runs the agent, however we want to call it. Ticket buying is another one. Like, let's say you want your agent to buy tickets for you. The regular use case is you buy a few tickets for you, friends, family, whatever. The bad use case is you're a scalper, so you buy lots of tickets and then you resell. So you have this asymmetry again, where like the price is different, right? And this is what we're trying to solve. We've made good progress, and again, we're using crypto primitives, agent scales, and a few other things to kind of like enable agents, specifically first like agents that run on your computer, like Codex, CloudCowork, and so on, to prove that there's a person behind them without leaking who that person is. This is very important for us. And also, you just do it like once in a while. So maybe you verify with your driver license, like digital driver license, once every like 14 days, 30 days. And then any service that supports this, you're connected to. So this is where like, this is the type of thing that we're going for, which is you need to think about users, right? Like you don't want to kind of like go and log into each of those services every time you want your agent to use them. That's one. Another one is you don't want to verify, do lightweight KYC for all of them. But you also like want this security, you want this to be, and we think we've achieved a good balance while not being in the way. Like once you have this proof on your computer, you can send it anywhere. We are not involved, and anyone that wants to kind of like participate in the ecosystem can join without kind of like a centralized node controlling anything.
Yeah, that's really cool too, because I feel like that also helps maybe like agents write policy around like which, other agents are okay to connect to and which aren't. Because I was talking to somebody recently about like this concept of like a agent supply chain attack where it's like they just have to, so an attacker just has to poison like one vendor essentially. And if like that one vendor gets connected to by thousands of different agents or thousands of different people and they get the same like malicious document with like a prompt injection and it's like downloaded from them, that's like very like one to many like attack that all of a sudden like scales out to so many different people. But if you're able to sort of know, okay, like this agent isn't working on behalf of an actual human, this is a bot trying to spread some sort of malicious campaign, that helps there.
Yeah, it's like the basic policy that we talk about that people get quickly is some sort of rate limit. So, for example, for their products, like this person can create n accounts in a month or a day or whatever. For tickets, it could be buying an amount of tickets per show. For social, it could be, hey, how many posts can a person do in a day, regardless of their account. But then you can get into more interesting policy, and this might depend on regulation and stuff. Like if you have countries on an embargo list and you can't serve them, hey, maybe you get a claim saying, hey, this is a country for the person.
Yes, for sure.
So you don't get into PAI or anything, but like you get that. Age might be another one. So you don't know the date of birth, you know the age. Because again, this goes to this kind of like, we don't want to kind of like leak your PAI. But like the age could be something that you're okay giving out for specific things. And being able to verify that could be important. So like those are the examples of like policy that we think about for this. And we're getting good feedback from different companies about it.
Yeah, no, that's super exciting. What's the timeline for it? Is it out already?
I cannot share a timeline for the kind of like the public availability of this, but we're currently in a beta. We're working with a few very important companies on like integrating their product to verify this or giving us feedback about how this will work. And our idea is that once we have a few partners that like where this is working, start getting feedback from kind of like users out there, like the other side of this ecosystem, and kind of like see how it goes from there.
Yeah, super cool. No, it's really interesting to like think about using the primitives we already have, plus like some of these new things that are in the work of like what can we add to the JOT essentially that like helps us make better policy, better decisions, helps us authorize our agents in better ways.
Yeah, exactly. That's kind of like the idea here. It's like again, we don't know exactly like when like people are going to kind of like start caring about this. But like I noticed this when I started using agents myself, or like I need to keep doing all of these things. And I'm security conscious, but like copying, like logging in, copying credentials, or like logging into each side, and like I just want this solved.
Totally, yeah.
and that's like when you start from like this is my motivation, like and you say, oh, this is something that like a problem that everyone could have, like that leads to good places.
Yes, and it's something where I think you start to see too. Everyone's trying to like create their own Auth solutions for agents, or like I'm talking to people next week about building internal AI, and like something I noticed at all the things in the blogs that they posted about building it is they're rebuilding the same credential stores, they're rebuilding the same sort of like short-lived token idea. So like, what does the solution today need to include so people don't feel like they need to build it from scratch?
Yeah, and this maybe gets into like not necessarily a security question, but it's more like a buy versus build question. I think, again, everyone's reevaluating that because it looks very easy to build. I think the thing is, like, is it really? Like, as we talked about before, what about the edge cases? What happens when it goes wrong? What about the support costs? What about expertise? Like, if you're implementing your own security primitives, when it fails, do you know how to fix it? And you don't want things to go wrong, but at the same time, I've seen how things go wrong, and this is like when we've gotten into like again, customers that call us at the beginning are like, "Hey, we're having these problems." So if people know what they're doing, I think it's great that they build. If the maintenance cost of that is lower than like actually buying something, it's great. But yeah, typical build versus buy, just like things have changed a bit. So like I think like I was talking with someone yesterday saying everything's warped now. Like perceptions warped, valuations are warped, like build time is warped, like teams warped. And this is just one of those things where like we're living through it, but we don't know how it results because like this is you're vibe coding or you're using AI to code it, but like the consequences are seen kind of like over time, not like immediately.
Yes, no, for sure. Yeah. Super interesting. Yeah, I'm really excited to continue to follow the human principle thing that you're working on, and also just like new protocols and updates to the space generally. Is there anything else that you're excited about today that you want to share with us before we wrap?
Um, I think one thing that at least I care a lot about is like, how do you sandbox agents? Like, but not sandbox in the way of like, I have an agent and I want to make sure that like it gets this isolated environment for like coding and like maybe like a new file system.
Mm-hmm.
It's like really protect them. I don't know if the word is sandboxing or something else because it's overloaded, but it's like,
Yeah.
you know how like the agent runs and like the policies for like what files it can access are prompts, so like it can actually escape your directory and do whatever it wants. Well, that's not good. And then same thing for the network, right? It's like, how much do you rely on the firewall? Do you need like an ML model to filter out traffic? And I have some posts about this. I have talked about it with some companies. And there are products and projects out there that are coming out, but I haven't seen anything that kind of like makes sense. So like I'm excited to see kind of like what develops in that area because I want to dangerously skip permissions basically.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. Yeah. And I feel like whatever you download to help your agents, like I've seen a lot of people like, oh, like here's a firewall that you can download to like help protect your agent.
Yeah.
So it's like great if they could just disable it because it's a coding agent.
Well, yeah, you shouldn't do that.
Yeah.
Don't disable your firewall everywhere.
Yes. But if you had a sandbox, you could like help mandate what's in that sandbox and what isn't. So if the firewall version of the thing is like the only thing available in the sandbox, it has to use that.
Yeah, and like even in the enterprise, right? Like you would have like centralized enterprise policy which can be enforced, and then like maybe you give users, which are not just developers, right? Because people are starting to use Cloud Cowork, people are starting to use like the Codex app and stuff. You give them some leeway. You need to keep the human in the loop. Okay, what's strong authentication from that human in the loop? We have some ideas there, but it's very early for us. But like again, like I see kind of like companies doing things out there, and it's something that I want this solved.
Yes,
and it will be very interesting because like I prefer not to use stuff if I know it could be insecure.
Yeah.
Whereas most people don't. People will go ahead and use it. So I think it's good if we can help them kind of like use it safely.
Definitely. Yeah. Super excited to continue to follow. And I for sure think there's like a defense in depth situation happening with AI security where it's like you kind of need a sandbox.
Yeah. You need everything. Just you need a lot of protection because like we're seeing things go wrong. And I think we're like, unfortunately, something bigger is going to happen. And until it happens, it's not going to be taken as seriously as it should yet.
Yes. And I remember like last year, there were so many like LLM guardrails that got released. And it's like we're still seeing databases dropped in 2026. So I think that was more of a soft boundary.
Yeah, I don't like LLM guardrails. There's a very good episode from Lenny's podcast. I don't remember the name. The very smart guy, and he talks about this. And like the good thing is that he's an expert in this. I'm not. But like I kept telling people like LLM guardrails, if they worked, the company that built them would be like immediately a unicorn because everyone needs them. Right? Like you want something that constrains you. So like the market tells you that they don't work.
Yes, exactly.
And like it's very simple. Yeah, like don't trust LLMs for protecting your agents.
No, for sure. Yeah, I like a hard boundary much better. Like Auth or a sandbox. Like I think we'll see more of those kind of.
Yeah, definitely.
Cool. Well, awesome. Thank you so much for taking the time to come on the podcast today. I really appreciate it.
It's been great, really fun, and thanks for having me.
Awesome. Thank you.